I listened. I said I had been busy and stressed with the preparations. She said she felt like I was keeping something from her. I looked at her directly and said, Adiz, I have been managing a lot of things these past few weeks. I'm sure you understand. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said she hoped we were okay. I told her we were fine. She left shortly after. I sat alone after she was gone and understood what that conversation had been. Not reconciliation, not guilt, but a test. She was trying to assess how much I knew. She had come away, I was certain, without a clear answer.
Good.
The more uncertain she was, the less time she would have to prepare. I made a deliberate choice in those final days to let Adiz believe she had settled something. When she appeared at the venue walkthrough the following morning, I included her in conversations with the coordinator. I asked for her opinion on the table arrangement. I let her feel the warmth of being useful and trusted. She visibly relaxed. At one point, she put her arm around my shoulder and said this was going to be the most beautiful wedding. I agreed. I meant it was going to be beautiful. In the afternoon, she told my mother that she and I were perfectly fine, that I had just been under stress, and that she was so glad things were sorted. My mother relayed this to me later, clearly relieved. I said that was good to hear. That evening, Adiz told two cousins who were helping with decorations that she had always known everything would work out. She said it like someone confirming their own victory. Beezy reported this to me with a raised eyebrow. I thanked her. I told her to get a good night's rest. I had asked her to sit beside me at the rehearsal. She agreed without knowing exactly why. She would understand by the end of the evening. The evidence was in a thin brown envelope. Inside, Rodomai's written account, signed and dated. Zara's summary of the bank transfers annotated and sourced. Screenshots of the social media post with the bracelet. Photographs from Adiz's room. The receipt I had found in her drawer. All of it in order. All of it quietly devastating when read together. I had also printed the family account statement showing the proxy access withdrawals, placed in a separate sleeve because it involved people beyond just us. The total picture was not of a sister who had made one desperate mistake. It was the picture of a pattern, planned, methodical, spread across time, involving a coordinated arrangement with another person. I had shown the full file to Tun the previous Sunday. He had read it without speaking, turned the last page, and looked up at me. His face was very still. He asked if I was ready for what came next. I said I was. He said he would be beside me. I had sent copies to a family lawyer, not to initiate proceedings, but so the documents existed with a third party, time-stamped and independent. That mattered. What people see matters less than what they cannot deny. The rehearsal dinner was at my Aunt Ngozi's house, her preference, and she had prepared properly. About 20 people, close family, the wedding party. Tund was beside me. Beezy was on my other side. The meal was warm and the room was cheerful. Adiz arrived in good spirits, dressed beautifully, and moved through the room with the ease of someone who believed the evening was simply an evening. About 40 minutes in, during a natural pause when the plates had been cleared and people were settled with their drinks, I excused myself quietly and spoke to my Aunt Ngozi and my mother together in the kitchen. I told them I needed a few minutes at the table before dessert was served. My mother looked at my face and asked if everything was all right. I said everything was fine, but that there was something the family needed to know before tomorrow. My aunt nodded. She said she would give me the moment. When I returned to the table, the room was relaxed. I sat down and waited for conversations to reach a natural pause. Then I spoke, quietly, so that people leaned in to hear. I said I wanted to share something about the wedding preparations that I thought the family deserved to know. I placed the envelope on the table. I did not raise my voice. I told the room that over the past several months, a significant amount of my wedding savings had been taken without my knowledge or consent. I said I had spent 2 months gathering information quietly because I needed to be certain before speaking.
I said I had been certain for some time.
I passed the documents to my mother and my aunt and summarized what each page showed. The bank transfers. The company account registered in Rodomai's name. The subsequent transfer into Adiz's account. The family fund withdrawals through the proxy arrangement. Rodomai's written account confirming everything. The The room became very still. Adiz did not speak immediately. She looked at the documents passing from hand to hand, and I watched the calculation happening behind her eyes, the assessment of how much had been seen, how far it reached, how many people were holding it in their hands at that moment. She said the documents were misrepresented. She said there was an explanation. She looked at our mother, who was reading Rodomai's account and not looking up. My Aunt Ngozi set down the bank statement and looked at Adiz with an expression that required no words. One of my cousins said quietly, "Adiz, stop talking." The wedding was on a Saturday, and it was everything we had planned for. The hall was full. The food was good. Tund cried during the vows, which made me cry too. My mother danced. My aunts danced. Bizi gave a speech that was funny and kind and made everyone in the room feel like they were loved. Adiz was not there. She had not been uninvited. She had chosen not to come, and I had accepted that choice without argument. The money was fully recovered between Rodomai's transfers and what was returned through a family conversation the following morning after the rehearsal. The family fund issue was addressed separately in the weeks after, quietly and with no public drama. Whether there are long-term consequences for Adiz beyond the family's knowledge, only time will tell. I do not spend much energy on it. What I know is that on the day I was supposed to be married, I was married, in a room full of people who were there because they loved us, with money that was rightfully ours, wearing a dress I had chosen for myself. Patience is not a passive thing. It is a form of strength that works quietly, builds slowly, and lands exactly when it needs to. This part would need to be handled differently, and at the right moment. The gathering was a small one. My mother, 2 aunts, a cousin, and Adiz and I. Someone had organized a casual lunch at my mother's house. Nothing formal. About 30 minutes in, Adiz shifted the energy in the room. She began talking about the wedding again, and then, with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it, she mentioned that she had been covering for certain financial gaps on my behalf. She said it lightly, as though it were what any good sister would do. The aunts turned toward me. I did not respond with anger. I put my fork down slowly. I said, "I appreciate you mentioning that, Adiz. I've actually been meaning to sit down with Mummy and go through the full picture of the wedding finances together." I looked at my mother. "Perhaps we can do that this week?" Adiz's composure flickered. It was very brief, a slight tightening around the eyes, but I saw it. My mother said that sounded like a good idea. One of my aunts looked at Adiz with an expression that was not quite suspicion but was no longer the warm acceptance of an hour earlier. I picked up my fork and continued eating. Rodomai transferred money into my personal account on a Saturday morning. Not the full amount, about 40% of what was missing, but it arrived with a note that said settling a matter as discussed. I showed Tund immediately. He had been patient for 6 weeks, and I finally sat with him that evening and told him everything. He listened without speaking until I finished. Then he said, "You've been carrying all of this alone?" I told him I had needed to be sure of the full picture before involving him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me now?" I told him I needed him to trust my timing for the final part. He said he would. That night, I moved Rodomai's transfer receipt into my main evidence folder. The partial repayment was not generosity, it was Rodomai trying to reduce his own exposure. It confirmed that he knew exactly what he had done and was now attempting damage control. What it also confirmed was that he and Adiz were no longer fully aligned. A gap had appeared between them. I had not created that gap. Their own self-interest had done it. All I had to do now was wait for it to widen. Adiz could feel something shifting. I could see it in the small adjustments she was making. She was calling my mother more often, positioning herself as attentive and present. She started appearing at preparations she had previously shown no interest in, inserting herself as helpful. But underneath the helpfulness, something more anxious was operating. She began asking indirect questions about the financial review I had mentioned at the lunch, about whether I had spoken to the aunts, about what exactly Tund knew. I answered each question with something calm and slightly vague, the verbal equivalent of a door that is neither open nor closed. She tried once to access the drawer where I had kept documents. I had moved everything weeks earlier. She found nothing. I watched her replace the drawer exactly as she had found it, the way someone does when they think no one is watching. She had not been unobserved. That evening, she went to the living room and left a gift on the table with a card that said she loved me and was so excited for the wedding. I read the card. I put it on my desk.
I did not feel moved by it.
I felt the shape of someone beginning to understand the ground was less solid than it had seemed. Rodomai called again in the 6th week. This time he did not speak in generalities. He said Adiz had contacted him and told him I was gathering information. He said he was concerned about how things would look for him if everything came out publicly. He said he wanted to cooperate. I asked him what cooperation looked like in his mind. He said he could provide a written account of the full arrangement, how it had started, what his role had been, and where the money had gone. He said he could also confirm that the family account withdrawals had been made using the proxy access Adiz had directed him to facilitate. I was careful not to sound eager. I said I appreciated his willingness to set the record straight and that I would need the written account within a week. He said he would prepare it. He also transferred the remaining amount that same evening. I acknowledged the receipt and kept my tone even. After the call, I sat with it. Rodomai was not a good person acting from conscience. He was a calculating person acting from fear. But the document he was going to provide was going to be just as useful either way. I called Zara and told her. She said, "Now you have everything." The final weeks before the wedding should have been simple. They were not. Adiz, now visibly anxious, began finding problems. The hall double booking that turned out not to be a double booking when I called to confirm. The caterer who supposedly had not received a deposit until I produced the receipt. A story she told my mother about the dress designer being unavailable that I corrected with a single phone call made in front of my mother. Each time I resolved it with paperwork. By the 3rd incident, my mother was watching Adiz differently. I pointed nothing out directly. I simply made sure that every solution was visible and that every false alarm traced back to itself. Tund handled the moments I could not, keeping things calm, keeping family conversation light, absorbing small pressures so I could focus on the larger thing I was preparing. At the rehearsal dinner, less than a week before the wedding, Adiz arrived in the dress I had seen hanging in her wardrobe with its tags still attached. She had removed the tags. She looked beautiful in it. I complimented her genuinely. She seemed thrown by the compliment. I moved on to other conversations and did not look back at her expression. By the week of the wedding, the family's attention had naturally shifted toward celebration. But underneath the festivity, certain dynamics had quietly rearranged. My aunts had begun consulting me directly about logistics, bypassing Adiz even when she positioned herself as the coordinator. My mother had asked 3 times whether everything was financially in order, with a thoughtfulness that told me she was sensing something she could not yet name. My cousin Beezy, who had started all of this with her careful warning in the car, stayed close to me during the preparation days. She did not know how far things had developed, but she was loyal by nature and practical by temperament. Adiz noticed the shift and began making more noise, inserting herself more loudly, offering more opinions, showing up earlier and staying later. Loudness from a person who is previously confident is usually a sign that the confidence has cracked. I watched it with a steadiness I had not expected to feel. I had expected to feel more anger by now. Instead, I felt something closer to tiredness and a very clear-headed sense of readiness. The wedding was 4 days away. I had a folder in my office. I had a plan for how to use it. Adiz came to my room on the Wednesday evening before the wedding. She sat on the edge of my bed and looked at me with an expression I had seen before. It was her concerned face, but there was something different in it this time. Something that looked like genuine unease. She said she wanted to talk. I said of course. She said she felt like things had been strange between us recently, and she didn't understand why. Then she said, "The account number is the key. Everything else is circumstantial. If we can match that number to a name, the picture becomes very clear." She said she would also need Rodomai's full name and any contact information I had for him. I had found his number in an old family directory. I gave her everything. She said it would take about a week. I told her I had 9 weeks before the wedding. She said careful was her specialty. I left her office feeling something I had not felt since the evening I opened the envelope. not relief.
Clarity.
The weeks had a strange quality during that period. On the surface, everything moved the way it was supposed to move. I confirmed the hall booking. I had a fitting for my dress. I met with the photographer and selected packages. Tund, who knew something was wrong because he knew me too well not to notice, asked me twice what I was carrying. Both times I told him I was handling it and would explain everything when I was ready. He accepted this with the kind of trust that reminded me why I was marrying him. Meanwhile, Adiz was at her most present. She came to the fitting uninvited and offered opinions I hadn't asked for. She joined a phone call with the caterer and suggested changes. She told my mother she was the one keeping the wedding on track. At a family dinner, she raised her glass and made a toast to her sister's happiness, and everyone smiled, and I smiled, and Tund reached across the table and squeezed my hand because he could see something in my face that nobody else was looking for. Adiz caught the gesture and leaned toward my mother to whisper something. My mother laughed.
I did not ask what had been said.
I was watching other things. Zara called me on a Tuesday morning, 7 days after our meeting. She said she had found what we needed. The account receiving the transfer was registered in the name of a company, a small logistics business that had been inactive for over a year. The sole director of that company was Rodomai. She had also found, through connected records, a second transfer from that company account to a personal account registered in Adiz's name. The money had moved from my account, through Rodomai's company, and into Adiz's personal account in 2 steps. Zara had screenshots of public filings, transaction confirmations, and a document showing the company registration. She sent me everything in a zipped folder. I opened it on my laptop and looked at each document carefully. The money had not been spent entirely. A portion was still sitting in Adiz's account, untouched. I did not know whether this was carelessness or confidence. Either way, it was helpful. I printed the documents and kept them in a folder at my office, not at home, where they could be found. I called Zara and thanked her. She said she hoped the wedding was everything I had planned for it to be. Adiz made the mistake on a Wednesday. She posted on her social media a photograph of herself at a restaurant, dressed well, laughing with someone whose face was half out of frame. She tagged the restaurant. She used a caption about treating herself. What she had not noticed or had not thought about was that the bracelet on her wrist was visible in the photograph, and it was a bracelet our mother had given me for my 25th birthday. I had noticed it missing from my room 3 weeks earlier and assumed I had misplaced it. I stared at the photograph for a long time. Then I screenshotted it, noted the timestamp and the restaurant tag, and saved it to the same folder at my office. A bracelet is not the same as a bank transfer, but it told me something important about how Adiz was thinking. She was not being careful anymore. She had stopped being careful because she believed, at this point, that she was untouchable. That kind of confidence is the enemy of good judgment. I had read that somewhere once and hadn't fully understood it until now. I went about my evening with a calmness that surprised even me. When Adiz came home later that night, I complimented her outfit. She beamed. The move came at my Aunt Ngozie's house, at a small gathering for a relative's birthday. Adiz had been building toward it for days. I could feel it in the way she had been positioning herself in family conversations, gently inserting doubts, asking leading questions. At the gathering, with about 12 people in the room, she turned the conversation to the wedding. She said she was worried about me. She said she had noticed I seemed overwhelmed, and she wondered if the financial planning had been too much for me to handle alone. She said it with such gentle concern that 2 of my aunts nodded sympathetically. She said she had been trying to help, but that I was too proud to accept it. I watched the room absorb this. I kept my expression soft and a little tired, the face of someone who was, as she had said, perhaps a bit overwhelmed. I said simply it had been a busy few months, and I was grateful for everyone's support. One aunt said I should let Adiz help more. I said I would. Adiz smiled with satisfaction. 2 cousins exchanged a look that was different from the sympathetic nods. They were not entirely convinced. That was enough. Rodomai reached out to me. Not directly. He would never have done it directly, but through a mutual family contact, a man named Emeka, who is loosely connected to both sides, who passed a message that Rodomai wanted to speak with me privately. I found this interesting. A man who had helped steal from me was now requesting a private conversation. I replied through Emeka that I was open to a brief call. Rodomai called on a Thursday evening. He was careful at first, speaking in generalities, asking about the wedding and how I was managing. I was patient and let him find his way to the point. After about 10 minutes, he said that he was aware there might be some misunderstanding about some financial matters and that he wanted to help resolve it quietly as family.
I said I appreciated that.
I said I had no wish for things to become complicated. I could hear relief in his voice. He said he would make sure certain things were put right before the wedding. I said that would be good. I said I trusted him to handle it properly. I texted Zara. She replied, "Document everything." I had already recorded the call. I was not new to being careful. The document Zara found next was the one I had not expected. While reviewing the financial records she had been tracking, she found a pattern that extended beyond my wedding savings. Over the past 18 months, withdrawals had been made from a family contribution account, a small collective fund that my mother and her siblings maintained for emergencies and shared family expenses. The withdrawals were modest and spread out, timed to coincide with periods of family busyness when statements would not be closely reviewed. The total was significant. Adi's name was not directly on the account, but 2 of the withdrawals had been authorized using a proxy access arrangement that my mother had set up years ago for her children during a period of illness. That arrangement had technically never been revoked. I sat with this for 2 full days before deciding what to do with it. The wedding money had been one thing, painful and personal, but between sisters. This was different. This was money that belonged to the whole family, including my aunts and uncles who had contributed to it in good faith. I did not tell anyone immediately, but I moved the documents into a separate folder. The envelope had been sitting in the same drawer for 11 months. A white envelope with the word wedding written in my own handwriting across the front. Tund and I had been saving since the day he proposed. Every spare naira from my salary, every small gift from relatives, all set aside with a specific purpose and date. The wedding was 9 weeks away. I had been adding to it just 2 weeks before, counting the notes carefully, feeling the satisfaction of watching something you have worked toward take shape. On the evening I opened it, I was not even suspicious. I was just getting the number for my event planner. I pulled the envelope from the drawer, felt its weight, and knew before I even looked inside that something was wrong. It was too light. I spread the contents on the bed and counted 3 times. More than half the money was gone. I sat very still on the edge of the mattress. The room around me felt strange, like the walls had moved slightly. I could hear movement in the corridor, the particular sound of my sister Adi's slippers on the tiled floor. Then she pushed the door open, saw me sitting there, and arranged her face into the shape of surprise. She was very good at that face. I had seen it before. The wide eyes, the hand going to her mouth, the quick concerned tilt of the head. "What happened?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I folded the remaining money back into the envelope, placed it on the bed, and said, "Nothing. I miscounted earlier." I watched her face. The concern softened into something else. Just for a second. Something that was not quite relief, but was close to it. She said she was going to make tea and left. I sat on my bed and did not move for a long time. I had a choice to make. The anger was there, deep and sharp and very real. But underneath it, something quieter was already forming. I had grown up with Adi's. I knew that the worst thing I could do right now was let her know I was aware. If she thought I was ignorant, she would stay comfortable. If she stayed comfortable, she would make mistakes. I went to the kitchen and sat with her over tea, smiled, asked about her week, and listened to her talk about herself the way she always did. She was practically glowing. I noted that too. 2 days later, I went through her room while she was at a friend's house. I was not apologetic about it. The dress was hanging on the back of her wardrobe door, tag still attached, a designer label I recognized immediately. It had not been there the week before. On her dressing table was a new perfume, a brand she had mentioned wanting months ago and said she couldn't afford. I opened her bedside drawer carefully and found a receipt. The total was close enough to what had been taken that my hands went still. I photographed everything on my phone, replaced each item exactly, and returned to my room before she arrived back. That evening at dinner, my mother asked Adiz where the new dress had come from. Adiz said a friend had gifted it to her. My mother accepted this without question. I watched Adiz eat her food with the relaxed appetite of someone who believed they had gotten away with something. Under the table, my phone held photographs of a receipt. I cut my chicken carefully and asked Adiz how her friend was doing. She smiled warmly. I smiled back. I was beginning to understand that this was going to take patience, and I had decided I had enough. The family has a way of knowing things before they're supposed to know them. By the end of that week, whispers had reached my Aunt Ngozi that something was off with my wedding savings. I do not know who started it. Perhaps someone had overheard. Perhaps Adiz had been less careful than she thought. What I know is that my cousin Bizi called me on a Friday evening and asked, with the particular gentleness people use when they already believe they know the answer, whether everything was fine with my wedding plans. I told her everything was fine. I told her the date was confirmed and the caterer was booked. She seemed relieved. She said she had just heard a small thing and wanted to check. I thanked her and kept my voice light. I sat with the information. The family was already circling the subject. That meant Adiz would know people were paying attention. I expected her to go quiet, to pull back. Instead, at my mother's house that Sunday, she sat at the table and told my aunt that she had been helping to manage the wedding budget and that things were very much under control. She said it with such ease that even I almost believed her. She was already building her version of events. It was my cousin Bizi who told me. We were sitting in my car outside the market when she said, quietly and with some discomfort, that she had heard something. She said she thought I should know, even if it was not her business to share it. She told me Adiz had been seen several times with a man named Rodamai, a man known in the family for being interested in other people's money more than his own. Bizi said the meetings had been happening for at least 2 months. I absorbed this without showing anything on my face. I thanked her. I told her I appreciated her telling me. When she got out of the car, I sat alone for a few minutes.
Rodamai.
I knew the name. He was distant family, a cousin of a cousin, the kind of person who appeared at gatherings and disappeared when it was time to contribute to anything. 2 months meant the planning started before I ever opened that envelope. This had not been a moment of weakness. This had been a deliberate arrangement, thought through in advance, which meant there was a financial trail. Where there is a trail, there is evidence. I started the car and drove home, already rearranging what I knew into a new shape. I have worked in an office long enough to understand basic financial records. I went to my bank the following Monday and asked for a statement covering the last 3 months. I sat in the bank's waiting area and read through it page by page. 2 withdrawals stood out, both in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger a notification to me, both made on days when Adiz had access to the house. I had a joint household account with a small balance set up years ago for shared expenses that she had a card for. She had used that card. The withdrawals were modest individually, but together they accounted for a significant portion of what was missing. Then there was a separate transfer from a third account I barely used, whose details I had kept in the same drawer as the wedding envelope. The transfer had gone to an account number I did not recognize. I wrote down that account number in my notebook. Then I asked the bank officer whether there was a way to identify the account name associated with a transfer recipient. She explained what she could and could not do. I left with what I had and drove to see a woman I had been thinking about calling for 4 days. Her name was Zara, not a private investigator in the formal sense, but a woman who had worked in finance and compliance for many years and now helped people with exactly these kinds of quiet problems. A colleague had given me her number the year before, in the context of a different situation, and I had saved it without knowing I would ever need it. I called her the night after the bank visit, and the following Thursday sat across from her in a small office near the island, laying out everything I had. She listened without interrupting, which I found steadying. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment,